Hi, my name is Jacqueline, and today we're going to talk about daylight savings time. But yeah, welcome to Progressive J. This one's not so much a progressive issue as something that I believe should happen. I just thought it would be interesting to talk about. Okay, so every year we go through this whole thing about daylight savings time, how it's archaic. Some people argue it should continue. Um, and there seems to be an argument on whether or not it should continue. Some would say, oh, keep it in daylight savings time, keep it out of daylight savings time, keep it the same. And you can argue whether or not you believe one way or the other in the comments down below. I, however, have a different idea. I think that there should be a global standard time implemented. Obviously, it wouldn't be through a global state telling you what time, because that would be crazy and very authoritarian globally. But I'm more thinking it's implemented by each country that wants to over time. And I think it should start with us, the United States. Instead of having four different time zones, the United States should just adopt the time of the international dateline. And you slowly get other countries to do the same. You convince them to do so. And usually, how that works is by doing it, you kind of put this idea in other people's heads that it might be a good idea. And the reason why I believe this is that there's a whole big problem where time zones and daylight savings time as a whole exist because of farmers. And that's fine. It's just overall for society, in an age where there are now more people in cities than there are outside of cities, for the first time in the history of the world, I would argue that something that you could do is make it to where the entire United States is one time zone, and businesses and people could adjust to what time it is daylight where they live rather than have time be the factor of when it's daylight. Because people aren't stupid. People are able to adjust to where they live. They'll go, oh, in this location, this time is daylight. If I go over here, daylight is this time, and it's no more or less confusing than trying to figure out time zones. And actually, instead of having to schedule a live stream or a address to people or a show, you'd be like 8/7 Central, and then 8 Pacific. Airing the same thing twice because you have to because of time zones. When you could literally be like, hey, at 7 p.m., there will be this broadcast, and then everyone in the world's like, oh, 7 p.m., okay. Which would then make the sun irrelevant. Because here's the reality, the reason why this is a good idea. Someday, far off in the future, if humans are still around, which I know it's far off, we're not going to be around our star anymore. Which means that the confines of time based on the star, based on where the sun is in the sky, no longer makes sense. So we have to consider far off in the future that we have to be ready for the idea that time marches on even without the sun being our clock. We have to make our own clock because time is a construct, after all, of our own design. We chose the sun, some cultures chose the moon. But either way, there's going to be a future without those two at some point. So we have to understand that time itself exists separate from these two things. So we have to consider, even if we keep the same thought process is like 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, that sort of thing. That's fine. We can keep that. Um, but if we're going to do the 24-hour thing, what we could do, instead of having to adjust to, okay, we have to do leap years because of the sun, we could literally do away with leap years. Being that if it's no longer based off of where the sun is, and it's based on our own contrived belief of what time is, then we can just measure it and not have it be complicated. And we could literally just do a thing where it doesn't matter where you are in the world, 7 o'clock is 7 o'clock on the dot. And also, think about this: instead of for 25 hours in a day, there's people all over the world who are literally celebrating New Year. When instead, imagine how epic it is if the entire world celebrated New Year at the same time. Or all realized something happened at the same time. Because here's the reality: the way history works in this world is, the problem is whenever you're talking about events that happen in history, and you have to say what time said event happened. Like, so and so got shot at this time, local time. Well, what's that time, local time here? The thing is, like, even while we sleep, history marches on elsewhere. So even though we stop, no one else does. So I think it's something to be considered to have a universal time. And why not do it with the international dateline? Because everybody will obviously default to universal mean time. But the thing is that might work, except that what would make the most sense is going off of the first time zone, because that would be the first place on the planet. Basically, whenever they do set the time forward, if they do it, you would not want some places to go back and some places to go forward. It would be better for ones to go forward. Now, I know you could also argue that it could go the opposite, where you could have it go all the way back. But that's really neither here nor there. Because the idea would be that if everyone adopts this, anyone in the world would know what time you're talking about when you say 7. Rather than having to specify what time zone you are, what location you are, and all of that. It'd be better if everyone knew what you were talking about. In a globalized world, it makes where things are always happening because it's always sunlight somewhere. It's better to just know when something happened rather than having to use extra communication to say a time zone. I'm not saying shatter the laws of time. I'm saying that maybe time zones make less sense in the 21st century. But that's my take. Whether or not you disagree, whether you think we should stick with daylight savings time, whether you think we should stick with one or the other, daylight savings time or not, but stick with the traditional style, go ahead and debate it down there in the comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. But that's just my premise. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Go ahead and leave your discussion in the comments. Remember, you have to be civilized or you will be removed. And I will see you all in the comments. Good night.